We're now going to close the centre back seam. You can see that I have pre-prepped already with the interfacing ironed on the length of the vent on both back panels. As with all the other pieces we've seen, I have the X to clearly mark the wrong side prior to my interfacing, so I'm not interfacing the wrong side and there's any colour mismatch in the jacket. The centre back seam of the jacket is curved, so be careful when you are sewing this seam that it's not stretched, and also to follow the curve. So the centre back seam has an allowance of 1 centimetre. So I'm going to back tack to secure the start, and always with mine I have the contrast thread. You would be sewing in black. As you can see, I've pinned mine to make sure they go together, and with the pins horizontal at 90 degrees to our foot, we can gently stitch over them. We don't have to remove them. So as I come down to the bottom here, our centre back seam, I'm going to continue down until I'm parallel to the top of the vent. Okay, so here we are at the top of our vent. I've repositioned the angle of the camera, so I hope you can get a clearer view. So as we stitch down the centre back seam, we need to come down far enough so when we stop, turn and pivot, we are then coming across 1 centimetre seam allowance parallel to the top of the vent. So I just need a couple of more stitches. I'm going to make sure my needle's in. I'm going to turn, make sure our raw edges are together, and then sew across the top of the vent. Now I want to stop 1 centimetre before my raw edges. So you can see here the end of the vent is not stitched. We've left that open. This is going to be used to attach our lining later on. So we stop 1 centimetre short. We then press our centre back seam open. But to do this, if I just open up our garment, I am unable to open the centre back seam while the vent is lying flat. So to enable to press the centre back seam open, we have to snip just through the single layer, not through both, diagonally into the corner. Then our centre back seam will lay flat and the vent can go to one side. Once I've pressed the centre back seam open, the vent lays over to the one side. I've also pressed, if we look underneath, the vent over as well. On our pattern, this has a 5 centimetre depth. Make sure it's parallel all the way down. Don't be tempted for it to be wider or narrower, so measure and press. I've also folded up and pressed our hem allowance which is 4 centimeters on the pattern. Of course, these measurements will vary when you start making your own patterns, so please double check those measurements to your own specifications. What I've also made sure of, from the right side, when the flap sits over on the jacket, they need to meet at the same level at the hem. So pressing up the 4 centimeters on both sides of our hem allowance hopefully should ensure that. But what I've also done then, as this section of the back sits underneath the vent, from this point to the end, I've turned up an extra couple of mil. So at this point of the vent, where they overlap, it's 4 centimeters of hem depth. This side, at the edge of the vent, it is 4.3. So that just ensures that when the vent is closed and one sits on top of the other, that we don't see the underneath of the vent. This is not acceptable. We need to ensure that the underneath of the vent is hidden. So next on the back panel, we've created a reinforcement sort of stabilizing section that goes across the shoulder, back neck, all the way over. This is cut in a Holland linen that is in our pack. You can also use pocketing. This is to keep the back in shape during wear, so it doesn't start to sag. Also, this stabilizes the shoulder area, because within the shoulder there is ease the back shoulder to the front. So stabilizing this ensures then that we can put the ease into the front of the shoulder that allows for the movement of the shoulder blade. So this has to be basted into position. I'm going to baste this in by machine. So I'm going to put the raw edges together. I am going to use the edge of the foot as a guide, because I don't want to see the basting stitch at all when it is on the right side, and obviously basting by machine is going to be far more difficult to remove. So if we just do it where it can't be seen in the first place, we're good to go. So I'm going to increase my stitch size to about 3.5. I'm not going to back tack. I'm just going to use the edge of my foot as a guide, so I know it's going to be hidden within the seam allowance. Needle in as we turn. We know it's not going to stretch because the Holland linen is, or if you use pocketing, would be very firm. So even though there's a bias grain here on the wool, as long as we make sure it fits to our stabilizing piece, everything will be okay. Make sure we follow the curve. Stop and start as many times as you need to go round. Don't be tempted to try and pull it out straight. Need to stitch around the curve. So back across the second shoulder, making sure our edges are together. And then down the back armhole. And again, no need to back tack, as this is just basting our reinforcement, stabilising section across the back and including the shoulders. So next we're going to join the back and the front panels together across the shoulders. So if I have our front and right sides together, we will not catch the canvas. Okay, this is out of the way and we are only catching the front jacket fabric with our back panel. Now there's a notch on our front and back, which if we align and I pin into place, you'll see that the back panel now has quite a bit of ease in it compared to the front. So you need to evenly distribute this ease, and it is easing this in, not trying to stretch the front out to meet. If you find it difficult, you can, as I have done here on my sample, run a gathering thread, and then you can draw that in so they meet, and then you can stitch your centimetre seam. You can also baste if you wish, if you want to hold it in place. You should have, where the notches are, this gives about 2.5 centimetres plain at either end, ease here in the centre, and that's for movement of the shoulder blade. When you construct this seam, press it flat and open, and then the canvas then sits over the top. Once you've done that on both shoulders, we can then join our side panel to our back. Again, there will be notches for you to match. So make sure you match the notches, ease where necessary, and this is just a straightforward 1 centimetre seam allowance, flat open seam. One thing to be cautious of, where your side panel comes to a point, your back panel is flat. This corner here should be 1 centimetre from the edge. That's your seam allowance. So you place this with your raw edges here together, and when that point comes to 1 centimetre width, that's where they start. If you put the point to the edge, when you open it up, you will have a strange step on your side seam. So make sure the width there is the base of your point, and then stitch your centimetre seam allowance. And this will give a nice continuous line then around the armhole. Then all our body panels then are joined together. Next, we will then be concentrating on the neck edge and applying our collar.